Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Draft League Retrospective. Today we've got another quarter-final match between me and AeonInitiate. Before we start this game, I just need to point out for it that on the day that we played this, Aeon had only had 2 hours of sleep, and so with that, it's to be expected that he's not playing to the best of his ability, that his brain's a bit fried, and that especially during as long of a game as this ended up being, that he's not and wasn't able to just make and stick to plans and keep the focus and concentration all the way throughout. And so, to spoil it a bit, I do win very handily, a lot of which is because of that lack of sleep and friedness of brain. But even with that in mind, there are a few team building principles and concepts, as well as quite a few plays throughout it that I think quite a lot can be learnt from, and there's a lot to explain and draw out about it. And in such a long positional game, there's just a lot of small incremental things that wouldn't be immediately obvious that I think deserve to be gone over and explained. So with that, we're going to quickly go over the teams. So on Aeon's side, we've got a defensive Mega Sizzle with Defog, Roost, Knockoff, Bullet Punch. There's a defensive Appleton, which is a pretty cool set. It's got Ripen, which means that its berries have double effect. It's got a Roap berry, which I hadn't even heard of before this game, but with the Ripen, it means that something that hits the Appleton is taking 25%. And it's also got Recycle, meaning that it can get that Roap back and keep doing it. There is an Assault Vest Hitmontop, which is quite difficult for most of my team to break, really, and it has very good coverage to hit everything with Close Combat, Triple Axle, Sucker Punch, and Bullet Punch. There's a Slowbro with Teleport, Future Sight, Slack Off, and Ice Beam, which interestingly lacks the Scald and lacks a Psychic move with a one-turn effect, but the Future Sight can be annoying and disruptive, and I nearly forget about it at one point, which is just what happens in these long-ass games. There's a Choice Scarf Tapu Fini that's also got Trick, and that's pretty good because the Choice Scarf Tapu Fini is hitting and outspeeding and killing the Diancie and the Obstagoon, as well as getting a good hit in on the Mismagius, killing the Komodo. But with the Trick, it also has the potential to cripple the Milotic or the Shaman that it's not breaking. And finally, we've got Z-Fire Rotom Heat with Nasty Plots and its Dual Stab, which has got the potential to really threaten this entire team. On my side, we've got a Life Orb 4 attacks Mismagius, we have a Flip Turning Recovering Mixed Defensive Mismagius, we've got defensive Stealth Rock Komodo, we've got a Substitute Toxic and Leech Seed Shaman, Mega Diancie with Moonblast, Mystical Fire, all that kind of good stuff, and an Obstagoon with Obstruct, Fire Punch, Facade, and Close Combat. And looking at the immediate threats and win conditions on each team, for Aeon, the Rotom is very threatening. It's the only Mon that really has the potential to threaten both of Milotic and Shaman and put pressure on that defensive core that I've got, but its issue is that it has no recovery, and so it's going to be very liable to being worn down. The Tapu Fini, as mentioned, has the potential to cripple either member of my defensive core, making it a lot easier to break past, and he's got the Slowbro to go into and teleport out and gain momentum, which is very good for that, especially because my main way of gaining momentum on this team is a Flip Turning Milotic, which if he gets the Slowbro in on, the teleport, as well as Slowbro being slower than Milotic naturally, the teleport is negative priority, meaning that I would always flip turn out into something and then he can teleport out into whoever he wants. So win-con wise is that Rotom being able to break through the defensive core, and then the idea is that the Tapu Fini is able to clean up everybody else, with the rest of the Mons being there to just kind of outlast. And the Assault Vest on the Hitmontop, I had sussed out it was probably Assault Vest, he'd used it before, but I think the idea there is that it can live a hit from Diancie, it can live hits you're not expecting from Mismagius, from Shaman, and then with the triple axle, with the Sucker Punch, with the close combat, potential Bullet Punch, it is gonna threaten those Mons right back. Now, on my side, Aeon's team does not switch into Obstagoon, especially one with Fire Punch, and since Aeon's got such a slow team, Mons like Obstagoon that struggle against more offensive teams that outspeed and kill it look incredible, which, I mean, is why I bought it. I've got the Fire Punch for the Mega Sizzle that would otherwise scare it, and nobody else is switching into a Facade in the slightest. The Mismagius is also looking really good. It's got the Mystical Fire for the Sizzle, and I'm thinking going in, if I take 70% from a Bullet Punch to kill it back, great, I take that trade. The Shaman is also very threatening because of how naturally slow Aeon's team is. I can just get substitutes up and then I'm Toxicking, I'm Leech Seeding, I'm never dying. The Komodo is mainly there in case of a Swords Dance Sizzle or a Stack Attacker, neither of which Aeon ends up bringing, but it can still get up Stealth Rocks, it can disrupt with Taunt, it can Flamethrower the Sizzle, and it has value to bring. And the Milotic is just good. It switches into the Hitmontop, into the Slowbro, into the Tapu Fini, into the Sizzle, all day, every day. And with that, we're going to get right into it. So, for the leads, what we're going to see is that the Diancie lead is met with a Sizzle, which is Aeon getting the better of the lead game turn one. The rationale behind the Diancie is that the Hitmontop, the Appleton, the Rotom are all immediately threatened. I was probably expecting a Rotom lead, but the Sizzle is going to scare that out immediately. And so turn one, I go into Komodo, and I get knocked off, losing my leftovers. The win button name, by the way, is a bit of a deceptive name because usually I use a Dragon Dance or a Belly Drum Komodo or a Clangorous Soul one where you just come in and you press the win button. And I'm hoping to make Aeon think that I'm something like that, even though I'm a defensive one. And then I go into the Milotic here because I'm expecting the Tapu Fini to come in, which I can then flip turn out on. I should have just gone for the Stealth Rock here, really. But the Slowbro comes in, which is another good switch in to a Komodo, so it makes complete sense from Aeon. But I'm not going to get my Stealth Rocks up there. Instead, here comes the Milotic. So I'm going to just flip turn out on that Slowbro because I'm not a toxic Milotic, I can't touch it, and I go into Shaman as he teleports out back into the Sizzle. And I go Milotic here, just thinking, well, the Komodo has been knocked off, I don't want to waste all its HP now that I can't get any back. And I take a Bullet Punch, and I think the Bullet Punch here is potentially expecting the Komodo and just wanting to do the move that will get you the most damage on it, because a Bullet Punch isn't doing a whole lot to a Shaman, and if I stay in, that lets me HP Fire, that lets me Substitute, that lets me Leech Seed, that lets me do whatever I've got that can annoy a Sizzle. But in comes Milotic, and turn 4, well that was turn 4, turn 5, we see from Aeon a very big risk in order to get a bit of progress, which is that he's going to leave a Sizzle in to knock off my leftovers, risking the Scald, which does get the burn. And this is huge. And there's no reason to risk this, really, because he's got a Tapu Fini, which can set up the Misty Terrain in which Mons can't get statused. So you could go into that and take pretty much no damage. You could go into Slowbro, which actually wants to get burned, because that means that I can't Toxic it, and you're only taking 6 every turn, which you can deal with, but this Sizzle now just isn't going to threaten anything ever. And as a Mega, it can't hold leftovers, so it's just losing HP every turn, And once it gets stealth rocks up, that's going to be even more difficult for it to ever switch in. It's going to force it to roost all the time, and this is a huge advantage for me. And I get why you'd want the Milotic knocked off, because for the Tapu Fini to win, you need this thing gone. You want it to lose its recovery. Losing the leftovers is a great first step towards that. But I think that ultimately you shouldn't be risking the Scizor this early on when you have much easier options you can go for. And I think that going straight for the knockoff here, I think, is a bit impatient, really. Whereas if you go into something else and wait a bit longer, you can potentially get to a situation in which you've got the Scizor in on the Milotic with a Misty Terrain up, and then you can knock off very freely. But the Scizor's burnt, and the game continues as he now goes into the Appleton, as I just go for a nice safe recover, and I don't agree with the Slowbro here, because I can just flip turn out and that gives me more initiative, whereas the Appleton could go for some kind of attack. I'm not sure here if Aeon just doesn't think of that, or if he thinks that I'm expecting the row up somehow and I don't want to take the damage on my Milotic, but I'm able to just flip turn out. And a quick thing I want to explain about the recover is that the reason that I can recover as he goes Appleton, rather than just flip turning out and going for momentum, is because his defensive mons, the Appleton and the Slowbro, they are so passive that I don't care if they get in and get the initiative, because they can't do anything to me. And I can just recover up on the Appleton and then flip turn out into the Shaman and take anything the Appleton wants to do. And it's that lack of threat and offensive presence that allows me to play really carefully and at times cede the momentum, because I just don't care if he gets the momentum. So flip turn, and in comes Sonic OC, the Shaman, as Aeon goes hard into the Rotom Heat, which, when the Rotom Heat is so important and you need it for breaking through, I don't like risking going hard into it. But in this situation, because you've let the Scizor get burnt, the Scizor isn't threatening the Shaman anymore, so you can't really go into it. The Shaman beats a burnt Scizor because it can substitute and Leech Seed, and the Leech Seed along with the burn is going to just make you waste all of your roosts in the long term. And you could maybe go Appleton, but we'll see that this Appleton set also isn't very well equipped to deal with or damage a Shaman. So the Rotom here isn't good, but I can also see why you would go Rotom. So I'm behind a substitute now, and this is a full Spadef Shaman. HP Ice doesn't even break the sub. Ridiculous. And I'm able to get the Toxic off, which is again another mon that is status despite the Misty Terrain, but equally you can't really go hard Tapu Fini on the Shaman, so fair enough. And after this, around a Toxic on the Rotom that it never recovers, and here comes Hitmontop as I go for another substitute. And the reason for that substitute, which is a bit greedy of me really, is that I'm expecting the Overheat to come out, break my sub, I sub again, then I can start Leech Seeding, and I'm just in and I'm never dying. But the reason you can go Hitmontop is because its Technician boosted Triple Axle is a multi-hit move that will break my substitute and then keep damaging me. And so I should have just gone for a Leech Seed here, got a bit of damage off on the Hitmontop, and just been a bit more patient myself after I'd lambast Aeon for being impatient earlier. So now I'm behind a substitute, but that doesn't matter because I'm still threatened. So I just switch out into the Milotic, which the Triple Axle is going to absolutely bounce off. And I just go for a safe recover because, again, I may as well, because whatever he goes into, I don't care. If he goes into the Rotom, then great. It takes more Toxic, and there isn't really anything else that's immediately threatening me that I can't just flip turn out on. And he goes for the Close Combat, which does around half, just under. And this kind of reaffirms to me that there isn't really anything threatening my Milotic here, because I can just recover up, because Close Combat doesn't have as many uses as recover, and so I can just waste all of his close combats if I really want, and if this is the best thing he has to hit my Milotic with, then he's going to have a rough game of not breaking Milotic. So the close combat comes out, and as he goes slowbro, I recover. And we have this same situation again of, yes, he can go slowbro, he can teleport out, he can get the initiative, but I don't care because he can't do anything with it because of the passivity of his team. So we flip turn out on the slowbro, completely fine. And this time I decide to be aggressive and go hard Obstagoon because I'm not expecting him to attack me. And he throws out a Future Sight. And now the Obstagoon is in and something is getting smacked. On that Obstagoon, I'm expecting the Tapu Fini, which comes in. So I just go Milotic, ready to, again, flip turn out on the Tapu Fini, start gaining some momentum. Tapu Fini on Obstagoon isn't very good, which is because offensive Tapu Fini that this is takes 70% from a facade, or failing that, you lose your Choice Scarf, which you need. But here, we've got the Milotic in on the Tapu Fini, and so that switches out into the Appleton as we flip turn out on it, and Shaman is back in again, taking the Future Sight, but not desperately caring, whatever. Predict the Leech Seeds, predict the Hitmontop and go for the Leech Seed even, which is really good for me because it's just getting damage off on that Hitmontop that it's never recovering. Now, Aeon makes a good play here. He expects the Milotic on the Hitmontop, and so he goes into the Appleton. But the problem is, again, that this Appleton is just so passive that, yes, he can get it in on something, he can make a play like that that forces me to switch, but then he isn't able to press the advantage because he doesn't have anything with which to press that advantage. So he switches out here, which I disagree with because I think he is predicting me to go on the Appleton into something that the Tapu Fini can threaten, but it just gives me a flip turn. And he could also have been scouting for the Ice Beam because this isn't a thick fat Appleton, this is a ripen one, but the flip turn is just really free. I always flip turn there. And the Tapu Fini takes 6%, which you'd think would be pretty inconsequential, but I'm actually able to learn a lot from this 6% because I went on the damage calcs and looked at how much a Tapu Fini is taking, and I found out that this Tapu Fini is invested its EVs in speed and special attack because a fast offensive Tapu Fini takes 6, an HP and defense invested one takes 4. So now we know almost beyond shadow of a doubt that this is Choice Scarf Tapu Fini, and so I just go Shaman again and it has to switch. And the reason that I go Obstagoon here, hard on a Tapu Fini, is because at this point the game was getting a little bit stale, so I decided to try and kind of risk making a flashy play, because I felt like I'm at such an advantage that even if this doesn't work out, it's fine, I can still win. And I was thinking, if you leave the Tapu Fini in here, then this is where you go for a trick, because I think your Choice Scarf, because you're seeing that you can't break this core at all, so you have to cripple one of them, hoping that I don't expect that, haven't sussed out the Scarf yet. So I go, you know what, go for the trick yourself a Flame Orb and burn yourself. Everyone's going to go crazy, I'm going to look so smart, but he just goes Rotom instead on the Shaman rather than trying to trick it. And now I'm in on the Rotom, and I just go for an Obstruct here to get another round of Toxic on it as he drops the Z Inferno Overdrive. And the other reason I Obstruct is because Facade kills after another round of Toxic, because Obstagoon's ridiculous. And dropping the Z there, I think on one hand, you kind of need to save it for breaking through things, but defensive things like the Shaman, because you overheat, you don't kill, you lose your special attack, I Leech Seed, and Shaman weirdly kind of wins that in the long term. But I also understand why you would drop the Overdrive there, because this Obstagoon, as we've established, is a gigantic threat and you need it dead. And also with your Rotom on a timer, you can't just anymore just be patient for the opportune chance to drop it. because you'll just die. And so any decent chance to drop it does perhaps warrant dropping it there. But the Obstagoon is able to absorb most of it, and now I just get the freest facade of my entire life. He switches into Scizor, and Facade still does a lot because Obstagoon, and I'm then able to just kill the Scizor with the Fire Punch, which is my prep coming into play because Fire Punch isn't a normal Obstagoon move. But for Aeon, I understand not either scouting for it or expecting it there, because at that point you're a burnt, low percent Scizor. You're not really doing anything, and even if you do switch something on the Fire Punch, so what? I just Facade again after that. Just from a prep standpoint, really, there's just so little that you can do against Obstagoon that whenever it comes in, it kind of just forces something like that to happen. But now here comes the Tapu Fini. I obstruct here, which does kind of just look like a waste of 6% of my health as he goes for the Moonblast. But the reason for that is that we've seen Aeon make a couple of doubles this game, things like getting the Appleton in on the Milotic. And so I thought, if you double, I get a free Facade. If you go for a trick here, again, I'm thinking you're going to at some point trick, try to catch out the Shaman and the Milotic, then again, I just get a free Facade. And so to get that information, I'm willing to take the 6% on my Obstagoon. And now that I know that you're locked into Moonblast, I can just very safely go into either of my defensive mons, which Aeon does predict and goes Hitmontop. But again, here's the thing, is just that the Hitmontop is the best thing you can go into to threaten the Milotic, because he's seen by now that if you just go Appleton, then whatever, I flip turn out into the Shaman again. And so you have to go Hitmontop and just only do about half, and that just gives me a Scald because I outspeed and I'm on full, which is damage that you're never recovering. And you kind of just have to hope for a crit, or as Aeon does here, go for a desperation triple axle, really, at this point, because by now he's kind of seen there's not really very much that he can do, and this game's turning into a formality. So in that position, I do understand just hoping for a choke from me, hoping that I go Shaman for no reason and throw it out. But I don't, and so he now goes into the Appleton as I flip turn out yet again, which lets Shaman back in. And at this point, what's important is that the Misty Terrain is about to end, meaning I can Toxic it. So I just go for the Giga Drain to waste a turn, really, and his Roap goes off, and I take the damage there, and I take an Apple Acid. And so the Shaman's getting a little bit worn down. But the Misty Terrain goes, and I'm always going for the Toxic there, because Aeon should be switching out into one of a variety of things, but I always Toxic, just because if he doesn't switch out, that's so good for me. And even if he does go into something, then I still don't desperately care. If he goes Rotom, it's already Toxic, it takes rounds of that. If he goes anything else, then I'm not really threatened. And so I get the Toxic on the Appleton as Aeon goes for a Recycle to get his Roap back. And he then goes into the Tapu Fini as I substitute, which is, I mean, just looking at that, going your Water type on the defensive Grass type is a bit questionable, but he knows that I'm substituting, and I think the thought process here is that if he just stays in the Appleton, I get behind a sub, I get all my health up, he keeps taking rounds of Toxic. If he goes Rotom, then that's just getting Toxic down. Slowbro can't touch me. And so I think the thought process is just go into something that is going to outspeed me and break my substitute and not let me keep doing that. The problem being that the Moonblast comes out, breaks the substitute, and I get a massive Giga Drain off, getting loads of health back, and now I just get to go for another Giga Drain. And to be honest, I just forget about the Roap Berry here, because just it's a long battle and it's a Roap Berry, it's not at the forefront of my mind. But I then just get to get another substitute off on the Rotom. And I think the reason for the Rotom here is just that, again, the Appleton isn't going to do anything to stop me from getting more substitutes. So you have to go something that can break them. But now you're just taking more rounds of toxic, and I get a leech seed off, getting me more health back, and the Rotom is just getting increasingly worn down. And I go Komoro here, partly because I don't want a crit overheat to ruin my day, and partly because by this point I've realized the Sizzle was the defogger, and so getting the Stealth Rocks up finally on turn 36 is gonna just make this go a lot more quickly. As Aeon goes for the Nasty Plot, which I don't like because, yes, you need to get your special attack back up to break the substitutes, but it's just so slow, and it gives another turn of Leech Seed and Toxic and healing back up, and it doesn't really get you anywhere. And so now we go hard Slowbro on the Komoro, which is a fine play. It walls Komoro, and I'm finally able to get those rocks up. The Rotom is dead on the switch. Milotic again, because what's it going to do? On the future sight, as a flip turn out into the Shaman again, as he teleports out into the Hitmontop. And the Stealth Rock's coming into play already here, because that 6%, it doesn't look like much, but it's going to add up. Every time he goes Hitmontop, every time he has to go it to threaten my Milotic in any capacity, it takes that damage. And I get my leftovers, and then I do have to go Milotic, taking the close combat and the future sight. If the close combat crit here, then I'd have been dead. That would have been annoying, but it doesn't, and I can just recover up as we see another Desperation triple Axle coming out. But again, I never go Shaman there, I never throw it out. And Aeon sees that I'm not doing that and just close combats for the sake of doing something. And I then get a flip turn, not a flip turn, a recover on the Appleton. And the problem with going Appleton here is that you see that rocks and you see that toxic, he takes 18% just for switching in, which is going to make it so much harder for that Appleton to wall or do anything and force so many more recovers. And he then switches out into the Slowbro, which I also really don't like, because if you just went Slowbro in the first place, then you're not taking that 18% on the Appleton. And you've seen me flip turn by now so many times. I've flip turned 7 times already. So you know I'm just going for that. But rather than using that as a chance to recover, going Slowbro just gives me something for free. And so Slowbro comes in, I flip turn out, and I decide at this point, yeah, it's time to just force some progress. Big Mismagius. And as I fire off a Shadow Ball, the Rotom is just sacked to the Stealth Rocks before bringing in the Appleton. And the Appleton, it's not taking very much from the Mismagius. I don't have Nasty Plot or Dazzling Gleam on this one, so I'm not hugely threatening it. But the thing is, the combination of it being low health already and having to recover, and the Toxic, between those two things, I just kind of decide, well, I'm going to keep attacking this, and it can't just recover and stall me out, because the Toxic damage is going to rack up, and then you're going to have to take a Mismagius attack on one of your other mons that isn't going to appreciate it. So the Shadow Ball comes out, 33. It does get the Spadef drop, which is unlucky, but again, because of the Toxic and the low starting health, you can't just keep recovering. And Aeon realizes this and just goes for the Gyro Ball for damage before dying to the Toxic. And now here comes Tapu Fini again, which by this point, I know it's Scarf. Bringing it in this way implies that it's Scarf as well. And so with that in mind, I'm very free to just go into Shaman, which Aeon does predict and go into Hitmontop. But we have this problem again of Aeon can predict and switch appropriately all that he wants, but his mons just don't have the offensive presence to really capitalize on that. As all that really happens is I get another round of leftovers on this Shaman, and then I can just go to my full health Milotic and not care about the close combat yet again. And that's exactly what happens as I recover up on the Slowbro and flip turn straight out on it into the Shaman. And he goes for another future sight, fine. And he then just stays in on the Giga Drain because he doesn't really have a play, and this is the thing with Regenerator that cares the least. And as the Misty Terrain ends, I just go for a Toxic. I think the play here was to Giga Drain again because it's just damage on everything and it gets HP back on my Shaman. But my thought process was just that it can regenerate off the Giga Drain, but it can't get rid of the Toxic. So the Toxic is still fine, and by this point my advantage is so insurmountable that it doesn't really matter. But he's going to Ice Beam, and I'm a full Spadef Shaman, it doesn't do anything. And the Ice Beam and the Future Sight are going to get me a bit down, as I should have just Giga Drained again, but I go Milotic there for some reason, and then flip straight back out into the Shaman. The reason that I flip back into the Shaman, as Aeon forgets that you can't have two Future Sights up at once, is that I don't anticipate him Ice Beaming the Milotic because there's no reason to. And by this point, his last move has to be Slack Off, so he's effectively revealed his full moveset. So I'm thinking I get the flip turn in and I just get a free round of leftovers, and that's me part of the way on my way to starting to heal this Shaman back up. Because obviously I've won by this point, I'm kind of just thinking, you know what, it's 6-0 time, statement of intent going into the semis, I don't want the Shaman to die. Toxic continues to back up, as the Giga Drain here is very free, it's just damage on the Hitmon top. Take the Future Sight, but it doesn't really matter at this point. And then again, full health Milotic on the Hitmon top, and the Sucker Punch there, it's another just desperate play, really. Which again, I do understand, and sometimes you just get into a position where all you can do is hope that your opponent makes a mistake and play as if they're going to. But even then, the play is close combat there, because the Giga Drain doesn't kill you anyway, we've seen that, and I've calced it, and the Sucker Punch only did like 17 to 19%, but again, Aeon's had 2 hours of sleep. This is a very long game. Can't blame him too much, but the Slowbro comes back in on Scold at this point, because I was just thinking Scold is very, very free. Flip turn, back out again. Shaman comes in again, because even if he Ice Beams, I don't really care, because I just get a Giga Drain. And I get another round of leftovers as he teleports out. Back into Milotic, getting a bit slow by now. And at this point, I just Scold, because at -1 special defense, even with Assault Vest, that's killing. And at this point, he knows he's lost. We're talking in the call, and he just tells me have a Choice Scarf as I recover up. Which, like, sure, but this needed to happen 45 turns ago, really. And just by this point, it doesn't matter, as I go Diancie because he's not going for a water move, I know that, and I can just Mega and start hitting things and make this game end already. Mega, Moonblast, doesn't do that much. Special defense drop means I take 17 rather than 25, sure. And I can just keep Moonblasting. And the Tapu Fini comes back in, and on 6%, I decide that Milotic is the most deserving of the kill for everything it's done for me this game. And with the Scarf, I'm actually faster, and Milotic is able to get the kill, ending the game. And before I leave off, there's a few things I want to explain just about why that game transpired in the way that it did, and that's mostly to do with just how these long positional, attritional games of Pokemon are played, typically, versus how Aeon played it, which is that if you're going to bring a slow and bulky team and play with the intent of wearing down and outlasting your opponent to the point that the Tapu Fini is able to sweep, then you need entry hazards, because you saw how much switching there was in that game. And if I'm taking 12%, 24% with a Stealth Rock and a Spike on the Shaman and Milotic every time I bring them in, then suddenly I can't just go Milotic on every Hitmontop and go Shaman on every Tapu Fini, and that just becomes a lot harder for me to do, and it's a lot easier to punish me. And with those aggressive double switches that bring things in, they can also put on a lot more pressure and punish a lot more easily, because I can't just go Shaman on the Appleton every time without taking 24 that is suddenly really difficult for me to recover off in the way that I was doing. And I can't make these switches entirely with the intent of getting 6% back on my Shaman, because I'm losing more than that when I'm switching them in. And the other thing is just having a bit more of an offensive presence, because The Rotom, sure, but it's got no recovery, it's getting whittled down, and the Hitmontop is alright, but it just isn't that strong. It wasn't the strongest thing in the world back in Gen 2, never mind in Gen 8, and a Milotic that's not even fully physically defensive doesn't care about it. So if you're going to be making those kinds of offensive doubles, you need things that can capitalize on them. And you also desperately need status. Aeon's mindset was that he wasn't bringing status on things because the Tapu Fini is going to have the Misty Terrain up anyway, but we saw in that game how much of his team I was able to status despite the Misty Terrain, and he would have been able to do the same. If the Appleton had carried the Toxic, if the Sizzle had a random Toxic, if Slowbro had been able to Toxic, then suddenly Milotic is Toxic. It does get the Marvel scale, which boosts its defense, but then with the Toxic racking up, suddenly I can't just sit in on the Hitmontop and recover on it forever, and it can force me out and start making progress with other things, and I'd maybe be forced into the Komodo a bit more often, make a risky Mismagius on a close combat. Those kinds of very dicey, awkward, just 50-50 type plays that would allow Aeon to make a bit more progress. And the last thing in these kinds of positional games is that you need to be so careful with the things that have limited HP. So that's why I was rarely going Komodo, even on things like the Hitmontop and Sizzle that it could switch into, just because I don't want to throw out the HP on it that I can't recover. That's why I keep going Milotic, I keep recovering, I go Shaman and I Leech Seed and I get the health back, just because in these kinds of games, health is a very limited resource for some of your mons, and for some of the rest of your mons, it isn't, which is why on the Shaman, I'm so happy to get any kind of damage on the Rotom, even as it overheats and breaks my sub or potentially threatens to Z me or do anything, just because I can recover off that HP, the Rotom can't. And I think that about sums it up. We saw a long positional game between two quite bulky teams, on which one had status and offensive pressure and entry hazards and a full night's sleep, and the other had none of those things. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you again soon with another battle. Goodbye.